As we heard in the news, a Ryanair flight on its way to Spain from Bristol had to be landed at Limoges in France after the cabin lost pressure last night. Hadow was among the passengers, and he described what happened.
In the middle of the flight, we suddenly experienced a sort of multiple sensory experience of rushing air, cold air. There's a sort of rushing noise of air, and at the same time, all the oxygen masks came down, with having had no sort of preliminary indications from a sort of bumpy flight or any announcement from the pilot. So it was a sort of shock to everybody. And the whole range of sort of issues then followed from that. The main one was that the general experience of the 140 or so passengers was that no oxygen was delivered through the oxygen mask for whatever reasons.
Well, they just didn't work?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just a passenger like anybody else, so I don't know whether there was some protocol that meant that the pilot took the view that it was not appropriate to allow the oxygen to be released through into the oxygen mask, because perhaps it was safer not to do so. But I'd be surprised if that was the case. And there was certainly no announcement at any point to give any explanation as to whether we should or should not be expecting oxygen.
Could you all breathe at this point?
We could. We were flying to 30,000 to 40,000 feet, I would hazard, and we dropped steeply and almost immediately to 8,000 feet. We were told that we'd dropped to 8,000 feet when we were just 15 minutes or so out from Limoges, which was where we'd been redirected to. And as a result, there were over between 140 and 150 passengers on the flight, and nearly 35% of the total sort of number of passengers have had ear damage because of the speed of the descent, and have not been allowed to fly for at least 24 hours. You
are used to some tough experiences. You're an Arctic explorer, I believe, but this must have been pretty terrifying.
Well, I, again, would say, we've spoken to quite a few people, I would say that well over 80% of people on that flight knew they were going to die. That was the feeling they had in their heads. They were extremely frightened.
Did you feel like that?
Honestly, I don't wish to sound typically stiff upper lip about it, but for the first second or so, I was sort of confused, and it all happened so quickly. And then when I looked at my son's face, I knew what I had to do. And when I saw Tim out with his mask, and then my wife and daughter were sitting in the seats in front of me, by that time it seemed to be more a matter of trying to engage them and get them feeling that things were actually normal within the circumstances, and it was simply a depressurization of the aircraft. I didn't know that, but that seemed to be the absence of fire roaring out of an engine or the wing falling off. You know, that seemed to be all that I could see that was wrong, and we had oxygen. Well, we had oxygen masks, and like I say, I was expecting a more positive experience, whereby you'd know that the oxygen was coming down. My wife has since said that when she had a baby and she had gas and air, whatever it's called, she jolly well knew that there was gas and air coming through the system, and none of us did. And we never saw that. We didn't see the attendants, the flight attendants. There's no one walking up and down the aisle saying, you know, wrong this. Because normally, as I'm sure you're aware, you're told when the mask dropped, give them a couple of tugs. Well, how hard do you tug something before you pull it out of the decking and trying to get some oxygen through?
Well, I was going to ask you how you felt Ryanair had handled it, but I think I've got a pretty good idea of the answer.
Well, I think, as I say, I fully respect any protocols that the pilots had to observe. Their priority was to get the aircraft down, but I was surprised that there seemed to be no communication between the pilots and the flight attendants, because they didn't know what to say or do. And when I showed them that the sort of bladder which the piping passes through was uninflated, and you know, basically everybody's was uninflated, and I was trying to show them that, they sort of shrugged their shoulders and didn't know what to say or do. But really it's how the whole thing was handled as much also on the ground. When the Limoges rescue services did their best. You know, there's 15 minutes warning. When we came into land, there were sort of fire engines with their lights blazing all the way down the runway, but they all, so that's just part of standard procedure. And you know, it was a full-on emergency, and very, very absolutely minimal communication from the flight crew. Well, frankly, none from them, and virtually nothing until we were within 50 minutes of Limoges from the pilots, and that's added to people's extreme fear. Although I must say, people were brave, and there was no screaming or hysteria whatsoever. Although there were some that were obviously audibly struggling.
Ben Hadow, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Well, we are joined on the line now by Ryanair's boss, Michael O'Leary. Michael O'Leary will deal with some of the individual points he makes in a moment or two, but you've clearly got a lot of very frightened and unhappy customers. What are you going to say to them?
Good morning, Ed. I think we should explain the incident last night. There was some depressurization of the aircraft on the way from Bristol to Barcelona, and there is a standard safety procedure in these cases. When the oxygen masks deploy, the pilots, the cabin crew, all the passengers are required to put on the oxygen masks. Passengers sometimes misunderstand. They expect there's going to be a surge of oxygen, whereas in actual fact it's simply a steady stream of oxygen, and I've been in one of these myself. The oxygen masks were working. The correct safety procedures were followed. As soon as the captain had got the aircraft down to 8,000 feet, he did make the appropriate PA announcement, confirming that we were going to divert into Limoges for safety reasons. Following landing in Limoges, we arranged for a spare aircraft to depart from Stansted to Limoges. It picked up the passengers, and the vast bulk of them who travelled on to Barcelona last night landed in Barcelona at about 3:30 in the morning.
By the sound of it, you don't feel you have anything at all to apologise for?
No, of course we do. I mean, look, this is always a traumatic experience for passengers, but what you tend to get is a lot of passengers who are dealing with it in an unexpected situation, whereas the crew are dealing with it appropriately.
Well, except they didn't talk to anyone, did they? We just heard that from Ben Hadow.
That's the point I'm trying to explain. In a depressurization situation, both the pilots and the cabin crew are required by law, by safety regulation, to put on the oxygen masks. If they don't, there's a danger that a passenger or a crew member may become unconscious.
No, well, we all understand that. But I just want to put it, I mean, Ben Hadow...
Let me explain what actually happened.
You've done that.
The aircraft must get down to 8,000 feet immediately. As the passengers confirmed, the pilot made an announcement once he was down at 8,000 feet, explaining we were going to divert to Limoges.
Well, you say you're telling us what has happened. We just heard an account of what happened from a man who, after all, is a polar explorer, a man used to dealing with fairly difficult situations, and his clear impression was that the whole thing was absolutely terrifying because nobody was told what was going on. And you say the oxygen masks were working even though they didn't notice it. It might have been perhaps worth explaining to people what was actually happening, because clearly neither he nor those with him understood.
Edward, the first thing we do in these situations is take the safety first option. We have to require that the pilots and the cabin crew also deploy their oxygen masks, and they can't be making passing PA announcements while they have their oxygen masks on. As the passengers confirmed, the pilot did make an announcement once he got down to 8,000 feet where it's safe to take the oxygen masks off, that we were diverting into Limoges. Passengers were attended to in Limoges, and the spare aircraft arrived in Limoges and transferred them on to Barcelona.
Let me make sure I understand you correctly. Nothing that we have just heard from Ben Hadow makes you think either that the incident was badly handled in this case, or that you need to change the way you deal with these things?
No, everything that the passenger this morning has confirmed is the exact and correct safety procedure during a depressurization. Everybody on board the aircraft, passengers and crew, deploy the oxygen mask, put them on, get the aircraft down to 8,000 feet, and then divert to the nearest available airport.
Michael O'Leary, many thanks.
Thanks, Edward.